Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started because we're so excited to welcome Jane Barton and hear from her today. Let's start off with a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. If time allows, you will have an opportunity to ask Jane some questions. You can use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. Or to let me know if you have any technical issues. If there are similar questions, I can go ahead and group them together during the presentation so Jane can cover the topic immediately. Finally, we're recording this presentation, and anyone who signed up for the webinar will receive an email with a link to the recording. This is our fourth large-scale virtual event. We're getting better, and we're so honored that you're here with us today. I'm Amanda Rensmoon, Program Specialist for the Alpine Area Agency on Aging. We serve older adults and caregivers in Pitkin, Eagle, Summit, Grand, and Jackson counties. We are part of the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, and we are so excited to announce our upcoming rebranding because Alpine Area Agency on Aging, part of Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, is a mouthful, impossible to remember. It's a little governmental and sounds about as much fun as a root canal. So we are changing our name to Vintage. We will still be part of the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, but you no longer have to remember that we are the something something area agency something something aging something. We're just Vintage. Please look for our official launch on July 1st with new name, new logo, and shiny new website. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker, Jane Barton. Jane is the author of Caregiving for the Genius. And just a moment. There we go. Caregiving for the Genius, founder of Cardinal LLC, local caregiving expert for AARP Colorado, a passionate speaker, writer, and listener, and one of our favorite speakers and presenters. You may find her bio on her handout. Please help me welcome Jane Barton.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We're going to do a little magic here, and I will share my screen now. So hang on just a second. All right. So I so appreciate that lovely introduction, and just so you know, the feeling is mutual. I love working with you and Cece, and now I will say I love working with Vintage, so I don't have to say quite some words. So I'll need to change, get your new logo at some point in time, but congratulations on the rebranding and making it easier for all of us to remember the name of your organization. But it's my delight to be here to share some time with all of you that are tuning in, or for those that are watching the recorded version of this. As Amanda noted, I am an educational consultant. My company is Cardinal LLC, and I've also noted some other organizations that you will hear about today because we're going to talk a lot about caregiving resources. So I work collaboratively with AARP Colorado on a myriad of programs, as well as the Colorado Respite Coalition, and you will find their information in your handout as well in the bibliography. So if you want to go to their websites, that address is there for you to access. Now, as an educational consultant, I have the delight every day to do what I love, and that is to serve as a speaker, a writer, and or a listener. And I focus on the topics I'm absolutely passionate about. That's aging, end-of-life care, and caregiving. If you read my bio, you'll notice that I have a background in hospice and palliative care most recently, but I also worked in finance for 3 or 4 years, and I also served in the oil patch for 16 years as a geologist. So yes, I have a checkered past professionally. I own that. But the reason that I do what I do today is my lived experience with my family. And like many of you that are listening, whether you are a family caregiver or a professional caregiver, you've been on this journey before many times. And I was called to care for my mom when I was 15. She was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. And my family and I gathered around her for 8.5 years until she died. About 15 years later, my brother and I shared in the care of our father, who also died of cancer. I cared for my godmother who suffered from vascular dementia at the end of her life. And then a few years ago, I helped in caring for my brother who also died of cancer. So all of those experiences, I learned something because each journey was unique. Each journey was a little bit different because the diagnosis was different and my relationship with the person that I cared for was a little different. And so that really is kind of the crux, the foundation of our conversation today. We're going to chat about navigating the journey of caregiving. Now, if you're listening as a family caregiver or a professional care provider, there are going to be some resources that I will highlight that I hope will be beneficial to you and yours. And so for our time together today, here are the learning objectives that I'm going to touch on. First, we're going to recognize the nature of the caregiving journey. And although I think caregiving is one of the most sacred callings that we ever answer in this life, I also recognize it's one of the hardest journeys that we ever take. It taxes us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and psychosocially. And then when you add on the financial implications of that, it can be a daunting journey indeed. So that's our first objective. Then we'll learn how to literally map out our journey. I'm going to share with you a resource that I hope you will find intriguing enough to test drive. The third point will be to highlight navigational tools and resources that help you organize a community of care. And again, all of these resources that I'm sharing with you, they are absolutely free and readily available online. And then finally, after I promote this idea of planning and being proactive and leaning into this journey of caregiving, I'm going to recognize that all plans are subject to change. Now, that doesn't mean that our efforts in planning for this journey are futile. We will still benefit by anticipating the caregiving needs in our family or related community members. But we have to be flexible, we have to be adaptable and accommodate changes that will ultimately happen when we least expect it. So let's begin by recognizing the nature of the caregiving journey. Caregiving is a universal concern. So today, if you're listening to this, just out of curiosity, but you're currently not on this journey, realize that the likelihood is that you will be called to care at some point in time. And perhaps you have been called to care. Now, Rosalind Carter talks about this. She's well known for a quote made probably 15 or 20 years ago now. She noted that there are only 4 types of people in the world. She recognized there are those of us who have been called to care. There are those of us who are called to care today. And the rest of us, we will be called to care in the future. And the reality is that we will all require care at some point in time. So this is an experience that is a common cause. It's common ground, and it's a common concern. And so it behooves all of us to know a little bit more about this journey. So over the course of a lifetime, caregiving is an expectation. It is not the exception. We will all find ourselves on this journey probably multiple times from the time we are born until the time we die. So we are wise if we prepare for the journey, not thinking that, oh, I'll never go there. I'm never going to be called. No, you probably will. So how can you prepare for this? And why is it important to prepare? Because the journey of caregiving, it takes us through uncharted waters. Now, even if you've served as a caregiver many times in your life, as I noted in my introduction, I've been on this journey several times, and each journey was a little different. It all presented different problems, different challenges, as well as different opportunities. The journey with my mom was my first time to be a caregiver, and I was absolutely clueless. Plus, I was only 15 years old. When I helped in the care of my brother, I was almost 60, and so I had some experience to fall back on. And so that journey was very different. My relationship with my mom was very different than my relationship with my brother. So each time I'm in uncharted waters and I'm learning something along the way. And I have new things to learn with every time I'm called to care. Now, when we are in uncharted waters, a map serves to guide us. And I'm sure whenever you take a journey, whenever you go on vacation, you rely on maps. Now, the image that you see is a paper map. And I know that we are all electronically connected, so perhaps you rely on Google Maps or MapQuest. But a map is vitally important for any journey that we take. But you may be wondering, how do we map out a caregiving journey? That seems like a very different travel than perhaps going from Denver, say, down to Florida. And it is, but it's a similar process. I think it's a similar thought process in how we prepare for it. So just like any other journey, as a caregiver or a care receiver, you first have to recognize where you are. So that is your point of origination. So that's point A. Then you determine your destination. So that's your ending point. So if you're living in Denver or you're in Silverthorne, wherever you might be today, that's point A, that's origination. And then let's say we're traveling down to Florida, that's our destination. And then the next concern you have is, how do we get there from here? Well, with a map, you could approach it several different ways. You may want to go the most direct route so that you are efficient in your time. So that's a straight line. Or perhaps you want to do a backroads trip that is very scenic. Well, that's going to be a little bit different journey. Or maybe you only want to stay on the highways. Again, it's efficient, it's more effective. So there's no one route, which means there's no one journey, and that is certainly true for caregiving. Now, when we are planning for this caregiving journey, more often than not, we get called to care unexpectedly. Too often we wait for the crisis, we wait for the phone call. And in that moment, when we are in the blocks and we are answering that call to care, we want to dash. We want to do something. We want to feel as if we are addressing the situation. But before you take off, I have an invitation for you. Pause for a moment, because sometimes in that moment of crisis, when we are reacting, we can dash in the wrong direction and we waste a lot of energy. And then we have to do a course correction. But if we pause for that moment, then we can look beyond the immediate move and we can take in the whole board. We can pull back and have a broader perspective on where we're starting and perhaps where we are going. And we can develop a strategy for this caregiving journey. Now, a strategy, if we are mindful of it, if we are thoughtful, and if we take the time to put it together rationally and reasonably, it can serve you well until the journey's end. Well, how do you create a strategy to approach this journey of caregiving? Well, consider some critical questions. Now, the questions I'm going to pose, they certainly aren't comprehensive, but it will give you an idea of the questions to consider. And with these questions, the answers that bubble up, they will reveal your next step, one step at a time in this journey of caregiving. So the first question is to understand your role in this journey. Are you a caregiver or are you a care receiver? Now, if you're the caregiver, have you already received that call to care, or are you anticipating a call? So today, you may be knee-deep in the trenches of caregiving, caring for a spouse or a child or an aging parent. Or you may be anticipating that you will be called to care for your mother or your father sometime in the near future or maybe a few years down the road. Now, if you are a care receiver, the primary question you need to ask initially is, who is going to care for me? Now, a lot of people that I talk to in anticipation that at some point in time we're all going to need care, when I ask them, so when you require care, who is your primary caregiver going to be? Who will care for you? Now, this is a question I posed many times last year because I did presentations on the challenges of aging alone. Because over 30% of individuals over the age of 65 live in a residence by themselves. And I have to tell you, I saw a tremendous amount of fear on the faces and in the eyes of people that I posed this question to because they hadn't thought about it. And some people became defensive and they kind of pushed back on me. And they said, well, I am healthy. I am vital and vibrant and I don't need care. And I said, well, that's true right now. Well, what about tomorrow or 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now? Who will care for you? So this is a vitally important question for all of us as we plan our caregiving and care receiving journeys. Another question to consider as you plan for this trip: are you going on a long trip or is this a short journey? Because you'll prepare differently, just like a vacation. So this is understanding the diagnosis as well as the prognosis related to medical care. So for example, let's say the situation is that your mother's going in for hip replacement surgery. So the recovery time is typically what, 6 to 8 weeks? Well, that is a totally different mindset from the situation in which your mother is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, which is a progressive dementia that is ultimately terminal. That is a life-changing diagnosis for everybody involved. And so you are planning on a trip that could unfold over a period of decades instead of a 6 to 8 week period. So the planning process is different, the challenges are different, and your emotional and your cognitive approach to this trip is going to be different. Another question is, where are you headed? Now this relates to the diagnosis and the prognosis. Is the situation curable or fixable through surgery and treatment? Is it a chronic condition, or is it ultimately terminal? And again, this allows you to prepare physically, emotionally, logistically, bringing in additional hearts and hands if you need extra help, and it also helps you to prepare financially. Another very important question is to consider, who are your traveling companions in this caregiving journey? Now, for the past 15 years, I've encouraged people to create collaborative networks of care. Now, the predominant model of caregiving throughout the United States currently is that of a primary caregiver, one individual who assumes almost all responsibilities of care. And what we have recognized for a very long time is that no one person can do all things and be all things all of the time without compromising their own health and well-being. And that's why it's important to have other people involved in a network of care. Yes, you may continue to be that primary caregiver, but with a network, you have the ability to delegate some responsibility to other people in that caring community. And thereby, you can retain your own good health to continue that journey. Now, if you start to contemplate who your traveling companions are, you may recognize that your caregiving crew is not adequate. And maybe what you're recognizing is that, well, today I'm doing okay. We're handling the situation just fine. But you know, if you're dealing with a progressive condition, maybe a few months down the road or a year, you're going to have an increased level of care that's required. And so you will want additional crew members. So you can anticipate that. And so you can start recruiting people to join you. You can start to pick up a few companions along the way. Invite them to consider being part of that community of care. And so you have people standing on the sidelines, ready to enter your journey when needed. Now remember this, when you have a community of care, there are no free rides in this journey. And by that I mean everybody has something to contribute, because we all have unique gifts. And I want to highlight, I think, a very important facet of this journey of caregiving, sometimes not recognized, some important members of your journey team, and that is the inclusion of children. Now, I've had a lot of conversations with individuals that are curious if their kids should be included in the plan of care. And I always say absolutely. And make sure that they are invited to contribute in an age-appropriate way, obviously. But I think it's important for children to be part of the plan of care so they understand what it means to care for another person. What does it take? What does that commitment look like? And also to recognize the gifts they have to offer. I've been part of many communities of care. And when we've had children involved in that community, they bring so much joy and humor and laughter. They can change the energy in that caregiving journey. And they can do so much. Perhaps they can help with walking the dog. Maybe they can be involved in respite care, to swing by and see someone who is receiving care and watch a movie with them, or share an ice cream cone, or just chat about their day. Maybe if they're old enough, they want to mow the yard or run errands, go to the grocery store. So there are a lot of different ways to contribute throughout this journey of caregiving. Now, there are various types of support, and so all people are not going to be inclined to contribute in the same way. Now, I worked with one team, and I was talking to a gentleman, and he was very hesitant to become part of the team because he equated caregiving to hands-on care, and he was not comfortable doing that. But I also recognized in this gentleman, he had a real mind for accounting. That was his profession. And so ultimately, his contribution to that particular caregiving journey was helping with the filing of insurance claims and monitoring the inflow and the outflow of money. And that was such a gift to the family because they had not the inclination or the time to deal with that particular aspect of the journey. So we all have something to give and unique gifts to offer. Now, professional care, that's also a consideration on this caregiving journey. And more than likely, when we are caring for someone, family caregivers are the backbone of care, but professional caregivers will be required at some point in time. Now, if this is the first time you've been involved in caring for someone who has a serious, progressive, or chronic condition, you may have to do a little digging to find those needed services in your area. And depending on where you live, you may have greater or lesser opportunities for professional care. Now, I reside in Denver, so there are a myriad of opportunities to hire professionals in this journey of caregiving. But I know many of you that are listening to this program, the choices are limited. And with the COVID-19 situation that we find ourselves in, it's even more limited and much more complex to schedule that care. So the real highlight for this particular aspect of the program is be proactive in this and plan way ahead to understand what resources you can access when and if needed. Now, the bottom line for everything that we just talked about is this. If we lean into this journey of caregiving, if we understand that at some point in time we'll be called to care and we will all need care, if we recognize that we need to be thoughtful about this, to ask questions of who will care for whom, what services are available, and how we will approach this journey. If we go through this in a very thoughtful way, this journey of caregiving, instead of being life-draining, can actually be life-giving. Now, it doesn't mean it makes it easy and simple. I'm not saying that. But it can alleviate some of the anxiety and the stress that oftentimes bubbles up in a moment of crisis. If we've been thoughtful, if we've been proactive, if we have just a skeleton of a plan outlined, it can alleviate some of the worry. And that is a good thing indeed. So, sounds pretty good, right? We can plan for this, we can map it out. And you're sitting there still thinking, and how in the world do we do this? Well, seeing is believing, right? Seeing is believing because an image, a picture is truly worth 1,000 words. And so I want to share with you a resource, a very simple, very available, and very affordable because it's free resource that will help you to literally visualize your caregiving scenario. And it's an approach that was developed by an organization called the Atlas of Caregiving. Now, I learned of this organization probably 5 years ago, if memory serves me correct. And this is a group that was established by several gentlemen out of California. And their background and their area of expertise is technology. They were from the Silicon Valley. And so they are brilliant. They know everything digital. And when I met them, they were initially starting out training people on this approach of care mapping. And I asked them why they were interested in caregivers. And they said that they had both been called to care for individuals in their family, and they were very concerned of the limited resources available to family caregivers. And they also recognized that family caregivers are the backbone of care in our country today. So they have created a resource to help families to visualize what they call their care ecosystem that will help them to identify resources, gaps in care, and to anticipate the what ifs of the journey. So the Atlas of Caregiving, it is a nonprofit that is dedicated to studying in fine detail the hidden activities of family caregivers. And they use the metaphor of an iceberg when it comes to caregiving. You know that when you see an iceberg floating out in the ocean, what you visualize above the waterline is only 10% of that iceberg. 90% is below the surface. And so their assessment of family caregivers is that whatever we do, most of it's not seen. It's not recognized as caregiving. It's below the surface, but it's vitally important in this journey of caregiving. So they are helping to make the invisible visible, to help caregivers to do their work less stressfully and to get more assistance and support. Now, if you are a caregiver today or you have been, this should be music to your ears, right? So their service, their approach, this idea of a care map, it helps us in mapping out our care ecosystem so that we can map out our journey more proactively. We can visualize it, we can see it, and then we can live into it. Now, I hope that you will visit their website, and that website's noted in the bibliography of your handout. Now, at their website, they have some wonderful videos that you just click on, and they're about 3 to 5 minutes in length, and they walk you through this process of visualizing your caregiving journey, and it teaches you how to draw a care map. They're very well done, they're very simple, and when you hear me saying drawing a care map, please know you don't have to be an artist to do this. If you can draw a stick figure, you can create a care map. Now, we don't have time today to go through all of these videos, but I want to show you a completed care map and walk you through the process and then glean the information that is obvious by viewing this simple drawing. And no doubt, you will probably have an aha moment of, oh my gosh, who would have thought? I never would have imagined. And you can avoid disputes, disagreements in your family. You can come to a consensus much more quickly if you can have a care map on the kitchen table and just talk about it with each other. So let's look at an example, a very simple example of a care map, and see what we can learn from this, what it entails. So the first two things I'm going to highlight are these. First, you can determine the geographic proximity of caregivers to the care receiver. And then you can determine quite quickly who is receiving care and who is offering care. So let's look at where people are spatially. You'll notice that there are 2 circles on this map. Now on the inner circle, every stick figure that is noted in this diagram, that means they live within 20 minutes of each other. So they live close together. Now between the first circle and the second circle, that's within 2 hours. And then any stick figure outside that second circle, more than 2 hours away. So you can quickly identify on a map whether you're dealing with long distance caregivers or local caregivers. Now let's determine who is the care receiver. And all you have to do is follow the arrows. The arrows show where the energy is flowing into. The care is being offered from someone and it's focused on an individual. So look toward the right half of the map, and you'll see the smaller home indicated by the simple structure, and there is a stick figure by the name of Maria. Now Maria is an 80-year-old woman. She lives alone with her cat, Manny. And Maria was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 2 or 3 years ago. So she is the care receiver. Look at all the arrows going into that particular figure. Now we've already learned something of great importance here. Maria is at high risk right now because she has a progressive dementia and she lives in a structure all by herself. So we know this is not going to be a long-term proposition. We also recognize that Maria gets significant support today. Now, the thicker the arrow indicates more frequent visits by the individual. So if you look at the map, you can see that Cindy and Julie go by more than once a day. These are neighbors, and they pop in and out and check on Maria. She also is receiving care from her son, Mike, and his wife, Christy. They are toward the center of your diagram. Now, they have heavy lines, so that means both Mike and Christy are going over multiple times a day to check on Maria. So that's a high level of responsibility. Now, Maria also has 2 other children, Steve and Maggie, but they live further away, and indicated by the dotted arrow, occasionally they call her, maybe once every 2 weeks. So they're not an integral part of the care plan right now. So Maria has 3 children, and one, the person being Mike, is assuming the responsibility of care. So that helps you understand the distribution of care within that family. We can also see that Maria accesses doctors occasionally whenever she needs some help, and weekly she goes to an institution called the Oaks, which is an adult day center. So Maria is getting a lot of help right now, and that's a good thing. But I'm also concerned about the caregivers. So I want to see if the caregivers are getting a lot of support, because as we've talked about, no one person can do all things all the time. So I'm really concerned about Mike, her son, because you see a lot of arrows flowing out of him. So he's providing care not only for his mother, but also for his son who has special needs, Pablo. He takes care of the family dog Spot, and Mike also works full-time outside the home. His wife, Christy, is also doing a lot. She's caring for her mother-in-law, her child with special needs, and she also has her own parents that live more than 2 hours away. So when they have a medical emergency, in the back of her mind, she's wondering, how am I going to take care of them in addition to everything I'm currently doing? Now, I'm a little less concerned about Christy because she has 2 great girlfriends, Ruth and Angela, and they check on her daily and weekly. And so those are her girlfriends that allow her to vent and to process and to talk. And they're great listeners. So they really support Christy in this journey of caregiving. Now, the one thing that Mike and Christy both do, they are part of a weekly support group. And we know that caregiving support groups are vitally important for family caregivers. Now, in this day and time, those support groups are occurring online most often. And again, it fills in a need, a gap for caregivers to come together and feel supported in that journey. So there is a lot of information contained on this map. And if you sit back and you look at it, you start to recognize the blessings of CareMaps, and they are many. And I'm going to highlight a few. First, a care map helps a family, an individual. It assists in planning for unexpected bumps along the way. So in the example that we just looked at, if you were looking at this as your caregiving scenario, you can already anticipate that there's going to be a transition at some point in time where Maria can no longer live by herself as her dementia progresses. And then the family has to consider, what is that next step? How do we cross this bump? Another anticipated or unexpected bump could be this. What if Mike gets a promotion in the company that he works for, but in order to have that promotion, he has to transfer across the country? That's a huge bump because now the primary caregiver is no longer available to care for Maria. So that's going to bring in the other siblings, and it may require a transition of Maria to live with one of them, or maybe Maria travels cross country with Mike, or if they can afford it, a long-term care community. But with that map, a conversation can be had identifying the various individuals as well as community resources that can come to bear on the ultimate plan that's devised. Another blessing of CareMaps, it reveals the missing pieces of care. I highlighted my concern for Mike. He does not have a lot of support. Now, the missing piece of care wasn't for his mother, Maria, the care receiver. It was a missing piece of care for the caregiver. And again, this is a moment when you can sit back and go, oh, wow, how could I have missed that? Now, I taught a workshop probably 3 years ago in which we spent 2 hours in a room, and individuals had time to draw out their caregiving scenarios and then share it with their table mates. And a woman came up to me after the workshop and she thanked me for sharing this tool. She said, I never realized how isolated I am. She said, I'm the primary caregiver for my mom, and the missing piece is that no one is supporting me. And she said, no matter how often my friends kept telling me self-care is important, she said, I never acted on it. She said, with this map today, I'm motivated to do so because she said, it's not just about me. If something happens to me, then who will care for my mother? So again, it can be very revelatory. Another benefit and a blessing of CareMaps is a CareMap highlights the distribution of responsibilities. And sometimes this allows families to come together, and instead of arguing or becoming defensive, people can recognize what's going on. So I would imagine in that simple example that we just looked at, Mike might from time to time be a little resentful of his other 2 siblings that only occasionally call their mother. Mike's sitting there thinking, I go and check on mom 3 or 4 times a day. Where are my siblings? Now, if you're hearing this and you resonate with this particular scenario, a map can take away some of the defensive talking. People, instead of becoming argumentative, they can have a more compassionate response and say, oh, I never understood what was required on a daily basis. How can I help in a different way, even though I'm not here 24/7? So we can open up a possibility of constructive conversations instead of tearing families apart. So a care map, it sparks beneficial conversations. And an interesting way to do this, again, a story from another family I worked with, a woman came and learned the process of drawing a care map. She took that back home. She invited her siblings over for a Sunday afternoon chat, and she taught them how to draw a care map. And then for the scenario that they were in, each person drew their version of what was going on, and then they shared it. And as you might imagine, every version was different. And yet, they were not defensive. They didn't become confrontational. Instead, they were compassionate. And they said, I never knew that's how you felt. I never knew that's how you saw the situation. So this can be a wonderful catalyst for conversation. It enables families to proactively plan for the future caregiving needs instead of arguing over the minutia of the caregiving journey. So with a care map, we can identify who is ready, who is able, and who is willing to care. And we can also identify the resources available. The maps will push us to consider the what ifs. So what if, in our scenario that we just looked at, what if Mike gets transferred? What if Mike has his own healthcare issue and he ends up in the hospital and is not able to care? What if for Christy, her parents have a caregiving crisis and she is called away to care for her own parents and is unable to care for her mother-in-law? What if? Now, for your own caregiving scenario, we can't expect to be clairvoyant. We can't anticipate every challenge that may unfold in the future. But I think there are some pretty obvious what ifs to take into account. So with care maps, the other interesting thing to consider, there are 2 options on how you can create them. We've already looked at the hand-drawn map, and I think it suffices. In fact, I think it's the best way to start because there's something about actually drawing it out kinesthetically that we learn from that. And then we can add different things as we go along. But they also have an online digital option as well. And again, this website is noted in your bibliography. So it's free of charge. You just set up an account so you have a login and a password, and then you can save different versions of a CareMap if you choose to. It's kind of fun, and you can layer different things on your CareMap digitally, and you can actually make them quite robust and complex as well. So I invite you to try out both of those. So a 3D, the CareMap is a 3D process, whether you do it digitally or you do it from a hand-drawn version, but the 3Ds are this. You draw your map, you put in all the different variables, then you sit down with people involved in your journey of caregiving and you talk about it, you discuss it. And then the third D is then you develop your plan. Now granted, it's not going to be set in stone because things are going to change, but you draw, you discuss, and you develop your plan. Now, once you have your map, you may be wondering, now what? Where do we go from here? Well, it's time to get organized because as we noted, one of the critical questions to ask is your caregiving crew adequate? And for most of us, when we start out on this journey, it's not. You need to incorporate other people into this plan. So how do you get your ducks in a row? Well, I have some ideas for you. To coordinate all the efforts of the individuals that you may invite into your community of care, to make sure everybody's in the same boat, pulling in the same direction, trying to achieve the same goals, I would invite you to consider these online tools to stay on track. The first one I want to share with you has to do with online tools to facilitate communication as well as coordination. And these tools help to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Now, I would imagine some of you listening today have heard of Lotsa Helping Hands.com. This is a website and an organization that's been around probably for 20 years now. It's well supported, it's well done, it's easy to navigate, and it works. I've used this with families for the last probably 14 to 15 years. Again, it's free of charge. I encourage you to go to the website, to log on and create an account, and that will allow you a website for your quote-unquote caregiving team. You'll have a login and a password. Once you have your account set up, you will have an online care calendar where you can schedule all of your caregiving tasks. Then you invite people via email to be part of your team. And if they accept, then they will too have a login and a password to get onto this website. So you can email them from this website and you can schedule all of your caregiving tasks. Now, I used this particular website, this probably maybe 12 years ago, and you can create a schedule of care relatively quickly. There was a gentleman in, I believe it was Bailey, who was having a medical crisis, and I was working at a hospice at the time, and he'd heard about this collaborative community of care program that I was presenting. And so I went up to the mountains, I conferred with the family for just a few hours. They went out and created their website on Lotsa Helping Hands, and they notified me the next afternoon that they had already created a team of caregivers. It was about 50 to 60 in number, and they had scheduled all the caregiving tasks they needed for the next 2 months. Now that took a lot of work, and they were pedaling pretty fast, but a turnaround in less than 24 hours was pretty impressive. And this site served them well for the next 2 or 3 years as they cared for this gentleman. So it's certainly worthy of your examination and inspection. Another option for an online tool that helps you get your ducks in a row is Caregiving. Again, it's been around a long time, very similar to Lotsa Helping Hands. So it really comes down to personal preference. But Caregiving also has a scheduling tool as well as a communication tool. So I would invite you to test drive both of them. See which one you like, depending on how it navigates and all the buttons and bells and whistles, and then utilize the one that you like better. So we have Lotsa Helping Hands, Caregiving, and then for some people, social media seems to be adequate. I was chatting with a woman probably 6 months ago, and she'd set up a group Facebook page for her care team. And she was younger, probably in her 30s, mid to late 30s, and she was accustomed to using Facebook all the time, as were all the other individuals involved in that plan of care. So again, use what works for you. Use what you gravitate toward and use something that is simple yet effective. So all of these online tools, they reinforce the connection of everybody that's involved in that plan of care. Organization and communication will then allow for smooth sailing through your journey of caregiving. Now, if you're still searching for help, there are some beneficial community resources to be accessed. We talked about sometimes we have to dig deeply to find resources wherever we live and wherever that care is required. So let's talk about some of the options professionally that you can tap into. I mentioned home health care services, whether medical or non-medical. And again, depending on where you live, you may have greater or fewer opportunities to contract with these various services, but certainly to check into well before you need them. Telehealth is actually filling in the gap for a lot of individuals today because of our COVID-19 experience. Many people are saying, I don't want to go to my doctor because I don't want exposure to other people who might be ill. And doctors are saying, please don't come in because we can do this virtually. So if you have a phone, if you have an iPad or a computer, you can have a medical consultation. You can have that continuum of care, and you can chat with your doctor or your healthcare provider and get the help that you need in very efficient, effective ways. Now, telehealth was around before COVID-19, but it was utilized probably to a lesser extent. And now we see this huge uptick in the utilization of this particular avenue of healthcare. And I think it's a trend that will continue in the future because it's very convenient. Instead of having to drive to your doctor's office, if the weather is bad or you're not feeling well, to be able to conference digitally. So I think this is a wonderful resource for all of us to use, whether a caregiver or a care receiver. Some other services to tie into your plan of care, certainly palliative care. Now, palliative care is a term that many people may not be familiar with. It's a philosophy and a model of care that's appropriate anytime cure is not possible. And so if you have a chronic condition, palliative care is certainly appropriate. Now, hospice care is a specific type of palliative care that's reserved for individuals with a terminal diagnosis and deemed to have less than 6 months to live. Now, I know there are some hospice and palliative care services in the area around Silverthorne, Grand Lake, but again, you want to make sure you have those conversations well before the need arises. So you can dial that into the overall plan for your journey so it doesn't become a crisis or a point of anxiety at the end of life. Now, no matter how well you plan, as your journey unfolds, no doubt questions will arise, whether it's about the disease processes or resources in your community. So I encourage you to seek the needed information. Now, the screen that you see is obviously saying get online and find out, but only go to trusted resources online. Remember, there's a lot of information that is not well documented or even accurate online. So if you need some accurate information, seek a trusted source or get a personal recommendation for other people in your community. Discover educational resources through disease-specific agencies. So if you are dealing with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, MS, cancer, heart disease, whatever it might be, these agencies have a wealth of great information online, and they also have supportive information for caregivers. I've been talking to a lot of people in disease-specific agencies over the last 3 months, and many have started online caregiver support groups because they want to fill in that gap to provide resources and also a sense of community for caregivers that are feeling isolated right now. Some other caregiving resources for you to consider are these as well. You can check out my website if you're interested in other programming. I've moved all of my programs online for obvious reasons with COVID, but it matters not where you live. If you see something on the upcoming events page, a topic of interest, you can send me an email and I'm happy to send you a link to that webinar. I also have a media links page that will connect you to a series of videos as well as podcasts by the name of Careful Conversations. Now, I recorded all of these events probably 3 years ago with AARP Colorado. They're about 7 to 10 minutes in length, and they talk about specific facets of caregiving. So you can click on the link, scroll through the topics, and you can pick the podcast or the video of your choice and share it with family members if you find it beneficial. And if you're a reader, I wrote a book, Caregiving for the Genius, a few years ago. It talks about the journey of caregiving from the inside out. It talks about what it feels like to be a caregiver or a care receiver. Most libraries have a copy of it, but if you want your own copy, it's obviously available online. And the other thing around caregiving books, there are so many good books out there right now, some that have been published within the last few years. So just do a search. And I certainly enjoy learning by reading or listening to audiobooks, but there's a wealth of information out there for you. Another resource that many people are unaware of is the Family Caregiving Resource Center that is developed and supported by AARP. Now, this has information about all facets of caregiving, whether it's emotional, financial, if it's talking about self-care for caregivers. It connects you to the latest and the greatest information and resources available online. So again, I encourage you, just like checking out the Atlas of Caregiving, I invite you to take 10 or 15 minutes to poke around on this website as well. And I think you'll find something that will be of benefit to you and your family. The Colorado Respite Coalition is also a wonderful resource for family caregivers, and they serve the entire state of Colorado. They have information around caregiving in general online, as well as specific to respite care, how to get a little break if you are a primary caregiver. And they also have a waiver program that if you apply for it, you can receive a grant to reduce some of the cost of respite care. A wonderful group of folks, a wealth of information online that you can tap into. And then certainly your Alpine Area Agency on Aging, now known as Vintage. I think that would be your first stop if you live in the Silverthorne, Grand Lake area, going a little bit too far west. But I have so enjoyed working with Amanda and Cece and so many other people involved in this organization. They cover a lot of ground. They have a wealth of information about specific resources in your community, and I have no doubt they could serve you in amazing and wonderful ways. So, final question for you. Are you ready to go on this journey of caregiving? Are you ready to roll? Well, the first step, always do your pre-flight checklist when starting your caregiving journey. And that means take the time to map it out. And again, check into CareMaps. I think you'll find this very, very beneficial. Once you have your map, identify your traveling companions. Who is going along for the ride with you and what do they have to offer? Look at navigational tools that will help you to organize your caring community so you can work efficiently and effectively. And then gain the knowledge you need to plan for this trip. Understand the diagnosis as well as the prognosis. Now, even if you do all of this well, no doubt you will encounter some detours along the way. And I know it's frustrating. I know it is anxiety provoking. And sometimes you just want to pull your hair out because you thought you had such a good plan. So if you can get over that frustration and sometimes that rage, make the necessary course corrections to accommodate and to adapt to the unexpected detour or the change in your plan. Revise the route, and sometimes it's just a little bit of a tweak, sometimes it's a big tweak. But once you revise that route, then you can continue your journey one step at a time. Now, please know that I recognize this journey is difficult. I know it is daunting. I know it is challenging. And I know there are also blessings to be embraced along the way. So I wish you and yours safe travels as you start the journey or perhaps continue the journey today. So as always, I'm going to do a little closing ritual, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions if you have any. And today, to close our time together, I'm going to read a caregiving benediction. And I wrote this a few years ago to conclude my book. And the reason I want to share it with you today is that this really encapsulates my hope for all of us when we are on this journey of caregiving and care receiving. So a benediction is a short invocation in which we ask for help, blessings, and guidance. Therefore, there is no better way to conclude our conversation about the journey of caregiving than with a benediction. We need all the help we can get as we care for each other. So as the caregiving journey unfolds one step at a time, may we all be blessed in the following ways. May we have the courage to care for each other. May we feel companioned in the caregiving journey. May we have the wisdom to prepare to care. May we have sustaining faith to confront our fears. May we graciously offer and receive help. May we discover strength unimagined during times of loss. May we remain hopeful during the times of trial. May we recognize the sacred in the ordinary. May we engage the journey one step at a time. May we be grateful for the moment. May we humbly answer the call to care. May we listen well, love deeply, and live fully all the way to the end of the road. May it be so. So I want to thank you for dialing in to this presentation today. I would imagine it's lovely up in the mountains. So I hope that once this concludes, you can get outside and soak up some sunshine and blue skies. I wish you many, many blessings on your journey. And if there is any way I can be of help to you and yours in the days or weeks to come, you can always drop me an email at cardinallife@msn.com. I would love to continue the conversation with you. So I will unshare my screen here and then see if there are any questions that we need to address. Anything bubble up, Amanda? Let's see, it looks like some people asked about handouts. I know a handout is available. Amanda, how can people access that?
Sure, we will be re-emailing out the handout and a copy of the recording as soon as we get it processed and available to everybody that's registered, and then it can be forwarded as needed. Yeah, looks like we have another question from Elizabeth. What did you need as a 15-year-old caregiver that you did not receive? What is the best support you did receive?
That's a good question. It's an interesting question because so many adolescents are called to care for aging parents or grandparents. When I was 15, I think what I needed most was information. And I was in an interesting situation in that my parents were trying to protect me, even though I was the primary caregiver for my mom. In fact, I didn't know that my mom's initial diagnosis was terminal until many years after my mom died, because my parents didn't want me to know that. And so I always felt like I was kind of flying blind in the process. And so everything was a crisis. I was never able to prepare for what the next step was going to be. So I needed honesty from the adults. I really needed the information about what we were facing. And I could have used, I think, some friends that could have listened, maybe to a greater extent, but that would have been asking a lot at 15 years of age. When I was 15, dealing with caring for my mom, with all the side effects of chemotherapy, all of my other friends were worrying about, did they have a date to go to the football game? And so there was this huge disconnect. My adolescence ended and I was thrown into adulthood. And so I felt like I was kind of living in no man's land. It was a very isolating experience in many ways.
I believe that. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and unmute the phones just so our Participants who are just dialed in can ask some questions if need be. Just a moment. I ask that if you are on the phone and don't have any questions, please go ahead and remute yourself just so we don't get any extra feedback. Okay, the phones have been unmuted.
I see we have somebody from Texas. Welcome. I'm originally from Lubbock, so it's nice to see that you're online.
Okay, looks like we didn't really have any questions from the phone lines. And I don't see any other questions on the chat. So I think you must have covered most of it. Thank you, Jane.
Well, as always, I'm always available again through email. And so if people have follow-up questions at a later date, I'm always available.
That sounds great. Thank you. Thanks for taking time with us today. Thank you, Jane, for sharing your knowledge and your stories and your experience. It's always a pleasure. Please check out Jane's website, cardinallife.com, for her upcoming events, writings, and the link to her book, Caregiving for the Genius. It's fun and informational, and I really enjoyed it. And I read a lot of those books. So also look for our rebranding in July. If you're interested in remaining up to date on any of our upcoming events or resources, send me an email. That's also how you'll be getting a recording of the video. We can add you to our distribution list for our magazine, The Momentum. Our next edition's coming out July 3rd, and it'll be a digital publication. And then hopefully in September, things will be a little closer back to normal, and we will be able to have a print version as well. So thank you again. Thank you, Jane. Hope you all have a beautiful Friday afternoon, and this has been wonderful. Thank you.
Take care. Blessings.
Blessings. Thank you.